Everyone see my screen?
Yep.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. So hello, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming along and listening to my talk. It's been a long time since I've spoken in front of such a good-looking group of people, so I really appreciate you dialing in. I'm going to talk a little bit about internationalization in Rails and how it can get messy. So straight up, I work for Afterpay. Afterpay does the buy now, pay later stuff you've probably heard of. But I work on a different part of it. I work on a product called Money, which is like a startup within Afterpay. And it's a financial wellness product. It's technically not a bank, legally not a bank, but you might sort of think of it like a bank because you have transaction account, savings account, a debit card, buy your coffee, send money to people, that sort of thing. So we're just sort of like doing a little startup within Afterpay. And I work with really good, smart people on interesting problems. And we're always looking for other good, smart people. So if you are mid-senior, Ruby, dev, or infrastructure, DevOps, mobile app, anything like that, hit me up. All right. So straight up, I am old.
Is that like a mad suspense? Because my heart just stopped. Oh,
hello?
you're back. David is back. You froze when you said you were old.
Oh, sorry. Internet. I'm old, and I've been working on Rails projects for a long time. First commercial Rails project in 2007. So I've seen a lot of good, bad, and ugly. I've seen Rails projects that are falling apart, other ones that have done really well. And we're in a fortunate position with the Money team in that we just started this Rails app. We just ran Rails New a few months ago. And so we sort of get to learn from the past and like, what are the best practices that we can incorporate and what are some of the pitfalls that we can avoid? So today I'm going to talk a little bit about internationalization. Let me just hide the people. Yeah, so this is what happens. Like you get some code in there and you start to see some customer-facing strings appearing in your Ruby code, which is all cool. But the conventional wisdom is to instead have an i18n.t call and reference that. And then you put your strings in your en.yaml file. Now, this has a number of different benefits. Like obviously in the name, internationalization, you can translate your website into French and German and Spanish and whatever pretty easily doing this. It also separates out the logic from the data or the content of the website. And this is really important because this code here, this behavior, should be separated from this data here, which it allows the logic to be easier to read if it's not like interspersed with all the data. And the third thing is, one day your project manager, your product manager comes to you and they say, hey, I need all the strings that we show to the user, all the text that we show to the user, because I want to make sure that the wording is right. We're doing some new thing with brand voice and we want to be more blah with our branding. So send them over to me. And when you do it like this, you have to go through every single file, look for every string, decide whether it goes to the user or not. It's a bit of a nightmare. Whereas when you have your en.yaml file, you just copy that, send that to your product manager, say, knock yourself out, update it, send it back, and I'll drop it in. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this, as opposed to just having your strings straight in your code. But there's also some downsides. And what you eventually see is stuff like this. The key into the i18n.t call incorporates this error code variable. And so you look at this method and you're like, oh, what does this thing return? And you're like, oh, well, what's error code? So you search for all the places that call customer message and you find this and you're like, all right, error code here. Well, it gets passed into this method. So you search for everywhere that calls payment error and then you find this method. You're like, right, This one, error code, response. Right, so this calls a payment gateway. Now, a payment gateway is a third-party system like your PayPal or your credit card provider or something, makes a HTTP call to that, and it returns some response, which could have an error code. But what could those error codes be? You go looking at the documentation for your payment gateway, but it's poorly documented because they always are. And you eventually give up, rip your hair out, and go and live in a cave somewhere. Or you think, no, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go and look in my en.yaml file for everything under this and see, there could only be like a couple of errors under here. And I'm sure that this method just returns one or the other. So you get in there and you see your en.yaml file, and it is just a dumping ground of strings. And you're like, some of these strings probably used to be called, but they're not anymore. Some of them maybe never were called. It's too much, so you just give up. And then you also get this thing of the translation missing error. If you've ever worked with internationalization in Rails, you always get these in production. Somehow, like this payment gateway system starts returning a new error, and you haven't put a string for that in your en.yaml file. And so you start getting these in production. Translation missing, new error, or whatever the error code is. And a third problem with it is a customer comes to you and they say, oh, I did this thing and I got this error message. What went wrong? Fix it. And so you search for that string in the code, you find it in your en.yaml file, and then you go looking for where that gets used. And because you've got all this interpolated stuff with variables, you have no idea which part of the code gave the customer that error message. So it just becomes a bit of a nightmare of like redirection and trying to figure out what's doing what. You spend a lot of time doing that. And so we figured out that the real issue stems from, wrong slide. The real issue stems from having dynamic keys. If you just have like a plain string as your key for i18n.t, it becomes pretty clear what this is going to turn into. If you have an interpolated value, you're going to spend the next 20 minutes trying to figure it out, and maybe you never will. So we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could enforce this? Like, it's great to sort of standardize on this and tell your whole team, but then people forget, new people join the project. Eventually, you end up with this code anyway. So I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could actually enforce that there are only strings calling this? Now, as I said, I've worked in Ruby for a long time, and I'm a traditionalist. So my first tool that I reach for is, of course, monkey patching. And I thought I could just open up the i18n class, override translate, and check whether the first argument is a string. But this wouldn't actually work, because by the time it gets to here, all dynamic values are already computed. So this would always be a string anyway. So back to the drawing board. I can't monkey patch. I turn to Rubocop. So we were already using Rubocop in a project to enforce some of the coding standards, but we weren't using anything custom in there. And so I had a bit of a Google about if you can create a custom cop for Rubocop. And I found out you can. There's a couple of web pages that talk about it, not too many. And I found out that Rubocop uses the AST. Now, what is the AST? It's the abstract syntax tree. So behind the hood, when you run a bit of Ruby code, the Ruby interpreter turns that code, that string, into a tree of nodes to actually execute it. And using this parser gem, you can actually run a bit of Ruby code and see what AST it produces. So here it's just a simple 1 + 3 × 4, order of operations, the multiplication happens separate from the plus. So you get a send int1 plus the other part of the tree is like the send int3 times int4. Cool. So I thought, well, let's have a look at what the two different i18n.t calls give. One with an interpolated value and one with just a plain string. So we'll start on the right because it's the simplest. It has a send, it has a const i18n, that's the module, it has the t, which is the method, and then str hello 3. Pretty simple. All right, now if we have an interpolated value, it's all pretty much the same down here, const i18n, t, but now we have a dstr. Now I think this stands for dynamic string, just guessing here. So it looks like it says dynamic string, string hello, and then there's a bit of extra stuff where it computes the extra bit for it. Cool, so this is good, right? Because this means that we can say this is the code we like, and this is the AST that we don't like. So when you are making a custom cop, you create a class that extends from rubo_cop_cop, which is a great name. And you can override this method called onSend, which takes a node, which is the node of the AST. Now, see how these start with send. So because these are send, that means every send node in the AST goes through this onSend method. And so we can check this node and say, is this node an i18n.t call or is it not? And is it one that we like? So Rubocop also gives you these things called def node matches. And you give it a name and you give it a pattern to match on. And so I made this one for i18n.t to check if it's that sort of call. And I, from looking back at this sort of AST, I said send const i18n t, and the ... just means other stuff that I don't care about. So this is going to match all calls to i18n.t. And then I thought, okay, now give me another one that just matches the ones with strings. So it's very similar to this, but instead of the ... we say the first argument is just a plain old string. There's no dstr here, it's just the str. So now I have these two matches that say, is this a relevant i18n.t call? And is this the good type of i18n.t call? And so using these, using these, we can just go to onSend. So if it's not an i18n.t call, we just return because it's not relevant. If it's using it correctly, we just return because that's fine. Otherwise, we add an offense. And so now if we run it, we get an error. It says only use simple keys for i18n.t calls. It's a mouthful. No interpolated values, variables, scopes, whatever. So I just put that error message in there. And so this sort of gives us a guarantee that all of our calls to this throughout the code base will be simple strings. Great, done, right? QED, commit, merge, go home. But then I got thinking, well, what about the other problems that we have? What about this translation missing stuff? You know, like now that we know that every call to i18n.t is going to be an actual static string, we can compute whether that string actually exists in the en.yaml file. So how do we do that? It's very similar to the old one. Instead of having the ... here, I've just changed this for a $_ Now the underscore, whereas the ... means any number of things that I don't care about, the underscore means just match a single thing. And the $ means capture this. So like return this. So now when I call i18n.t string call, it actually returns the key name, which is the value here. So now we can like load up the en.yaml file. We can dig into it to check whether that key actually exists and it has a value in it. And if it doesn't, we add an offense, give an error message. So now when we, maybe we mistype something, maybe we put like a new string in here. When we run Rubocop, we get this thing that says, hey, this string doesn't exist in the en.yaml file, or it's blank. You should fix that up. So this sort of solves a class of problem which has haunted every Rails app I've worked on pretty much. And we have this as a pre-commit hook. So we just know that these problems are never going to make it to production again. So yeah, I was pretty proud of that. But then I kind of got, I don't know if obsessed is the word, maybe just keenly interested in making more custom Rubocop things for things that annoyed me. Every time I saw like a production bug come up, I thought, is there a way that I can stop this from ever happening again, or catch it before it gets to production? And so one of the other ones I made is, we've all seen the Ampersand Dot Operator, which essentially means if this first thing is nil, don't throw an error calling address on nil, just also return nil. So in this case, like we're loading the first customer from the database. If there are no customers in the database, this will be nil. And then it will say, oh, if there was no ampersand there, it would just say, there's no method address for nil. But because we have the ampersand there, it just says, all right, nil, that's fine. So what happens in a lot of Rails apps, and I've seen it in production, I've done it myself in production, it's, this code just happens to eventually get in there, is someone later comes along and adds another thing to it, and they forget to put the ampersand here. And so you end up getting undefined method country for nil. So I made another Rubocop rule for that, which, once you make the first one, they're actually really simple and quick to make. And you just like catch it early. Looks like this could be nil. Maybe use an ampersand dot. So yeah, I'm on the train now. I'm on the Rubocop custom making train, and it's great. You should all join with me. And yeah, that's all I got. Thanks for listening. I'll take any questions.
That was awesome. Maybe we should make a new Slack channel. Rubocop's custom. Sounds like the baby was agreeing.
Sorry. David, I'm wondering if with that safe try operator cop that you had at the end, can you set that so it auto fixes with the -A flag?
Yeah, you can do all that stuff. I haven't bothered doing it, but it's another little simple thing to auto fix things. I'm not certain enough of my code yet to like go auto fixing things for people. I more just want to like raise things so people can be like, oh, your custom match is wrong, and
I want to ride all through people's code. Yeah, I get it.
Isn't the -A fix it like might break things?
Yeah,
do that one. Are you guys going to open source this? Like, are you going to feed it back to the Rubocop community?
I don't know, maybe, yeah. Because I think like conceptually and spiritually, like Rubocop is more about like code style than it is about preventing bugs. But I've just sort of taken it my own direction.
Like, I see what you're saying, but I have used it recently, like a week ago, for fixing code bugs where I was coding with somebody and they made a slight mistake. And I said, right, why don't we just run Rubocop on this? And Rubocop said, because they did one of these things where it was like, if variable single equals this thing. And Rubocop says, did you really mean to do an if and assign something? Or did you really mean to do a double equals to compare? So that was like a really cool thing where Rubocop actually helped you, picked up a bug. And Rubocop shows you stuff that you just go, I didn't even know this existed. I didn't know that there's a .squish command. So we have a number of SQL kind of big long SQL queries, and at the end of them you can do a .squish, which will remove all the white space.
Yeah,
if you wanted to do that, and Rubocop recommends doing that for whatever reason. But it gives you, like, it's a learning tool. So certainly I think it's really good to have running the whole time and just like, oh, I could write this in a different way. I mean, you might disagree.
No, I think that's a good idea. I think like I'd always use tools like Reek, or I think there's another one that like sort of looks for maybe you've made a mistake here. But yeah, if Rubocop's incorporating that sort of stuff, then that would be a cool thing to make some PRs for.
I had a go making a couple of cops once for regex, the start and end. Normally you'd use the hat and dollars. But
oh yeah,
turns out that matches just a single line instead of the start and end of the string, so that can introduce security bugs. So you want to use backslash *A for the start of string and backslash lowercase z for end of string. But yeah, I didn't get all the way through it. So good on you for getting there.
Let me share my screen
Another
again.
one that was
Just exactly this.
enforcing use of fetch instead of the square brackets for hash lookup, because they don't have that one. Yeah.
Sorry, that was flying
Awesome.
right over my head. Brendan, what's the issue with calling hat for the beginning of a regex?
Someone can sneak an extra line into that string and your regex will still match. So like if you're using the regex to validate and a user provided string and they've put a new line character in there, like so lines beforehand and lines after, but the bit in the middle, like one of the lines there matches your regex, it'll pass your validation, but it's got this extra shit in it that it hasn't checked.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, actually,
I did actually get picked up by Rubocop does some regex validation. I was trying to not match things and I was escaping dots and escaping. So I was trying to do like a square bracket hat, not a dot and not a slash. And Rubocop said, when you're doing a hat, you don't have to escape the dot and you don't have to escape the slash with a backslash. And I was like, I didn't know that. So it taught me some regex.
I learned that one as well just yesterday.
DC, I wanted to ask, so in the translations COP, you specifically specified like the EN translations. Have you considered sort of setting that to dynamically go through all the translations so that when you are there, you write it and the app is currently only supported in 3 languages, but then the app goes viral and then suddenly it's supported in 50 languages. Yeah, I'm curious, have you looked at sort of dynamically doing it for every translation file, or have you been sort of coding it?
I haven't. So I guess first thing is we're not in any other languages currently, so it's not really relevant. Secondly, I think most teams run a process where they'll put the EN strings in there and commit that, and that'll go to main or master and production. And then like a few days later, the translations will come in. And so the EN is always sort of ahead of the rest of the languages. So I think you'd get a lot of false positives if you had that. And like Rails has a thing where it has like a fallback language, which people usually set to English. It's only when there's no fallback that you start getting these translation missing errors. Otherwise, you just get a bit of English interspersed in your French or German.
Could you make it a warning logged somewhere? Instead of an actual failure?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a lot of potential for that.
Damn, you've answered my other question, which was like, hypothetically, if you were showing us your screen again, what other languages would you be translating this maybe payment app into?
Just English for now. We're a startup.
It's interesting on that. I think Microsoft, when they were doing MS Access or Excel or something, they actually made their default language Pidgin English. So that basically they had to build translations in because everything would come out as this Pidgin English. So they'd have to then create the first translation file, which was English, but it then set them up that it would make sure that they could do any other language.
Yeah.
That's a cool technique.
Yeah. Another classic for that is to create a language that's all Qs or some letter. And then you just like navigate around your site. And if you see any actual words in there, then you know you've got things that aren't translated.
Wow. Rad.
Cool. Thanks.
Thank you, David. That was great. Really interesting. Really interesting. Now it's our third talk of the night. I don't know if you want me to share my screen to put I'll do it just because why not? Third talk of the night. Pat Allen with altering DNS with Ruby is a terrible idea, but let's do it anyway. Pat, are you ready to go?
I am indeed.
Awesome. Stop sharing